Civilians have been at the forefront of the war in Ukraine because of Russia's inhumane strategies to target densely populated residential areas and to assault Ukraine's energy infrastructure. When they can't win on the battlefield, they turn to soft targets and terror tactics. Russia's strategies clearly constitute war crimes, and one day there must be a reckoning for the tens of thousands of crimes Russia is committing in this war. But right now, across the country, fact-finding teams like Truth Hounds are tirelessly gathering evidence and testimonies of victims about Russian atrocities, often within hours of troops retreating. Turning this evidence into convictions will not be easy or quick, but it must be done. Today, I'm speaking to Roman Avramenko of Truth Hounds to learn more about their work. Welcome to Silicon Curtain Podcast. Please like and subscribe if you like the content we produce. And our material is now going to be made available on popular podcasting platforms as well, such as Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Well, Roman, let's get started. I'd love to learn a bit more about your background and your role in the work that Truth Hounds does.
Hi, Jonathan. Thanks for having me at your program. I graduated from the university as a physicist, and then I entered the master program of journalism. And after that, I became I've been working as a journalist and editor-in-chief of one of the largest Ukrainian magazine, writing about the mobile phones, first smartphones, like first phones with not monochrome displays and so on. So back on that era. Then I shifted kind of to public relations. Then I became a small entrepreneur. And later, when Maidan started, when the Revolution of Dignity started at the end of 2013, I've been to Maidan many times because I was traveling back and forth from my native town of Chernihiv to Kyiv to deliver food to people as an entrepreneur, and I stayed at Maidan during nights, mostly when the chance of the attack was the highest. And later, when the Revolution of Dignity won, and when Russia invaded Ukraine, annexed Crimea, and invaded the eastern part of Ukraine, I felt that I couldn't stand aside of this situation. Always joined the team, not joined, but I was among those who were initially at the very beginning of the team who started to travel to the conflict-affected areas of Ukraine with purpose to collect evidence like witness testimonies, first of all, and also to be present on the alleged crime scene to collect evidence on the international crimes, first of all, war crimes, but also crimes against humanity. So since then, for more than 8 years, I've been doing almost nothing but this.
And it seems to me many people I spoke to, Maidan and the Revolution of Dignity was a trigger point. It was like an awakening for many people who then got involved in journalism, political activity, civil society organizations. And it sounds, that was a trigger point for you as well.
Maybe it was. It's better to say it was the invasion, because I've been a bit active politically. I've been to Orange Maidan when I was a student, and then when this brutal violations and squeezing shrinking the space for us, like for Ukrainian civil society, was obvious. So I just joined all the people on Maidan without quitting my regular job. But when Russia invaded Ukraine and annexed Crimea, that was the turning point for my whole life and career. So since then, I spent more than a year in total, or maybe to this day, a bit more in conflict-affected areas. I've been to each and every settlement along the contact line in eastern Ukraine. I've been several times to Crimea, doing the same, like trying to collect evidence and then put them together with the suspects.
And of course, the public awareness in the West of these war crimes really has only come about this year since the full-scale invasion. How did it feel to be doing this activity, being aware of these crimes being committed since 2014, the repressions, tortures, disappearances that we know were happening in Crimea and Donbass, but not getting, as much, or getting very little attention from the Western media?
You're right. There were times when I felt really desperate of what I'm doing, of what I would be able to achieve. First, initially, we're focusing on the International Criminal Court. We've been preparing the submissions. We've been sending to them tons of evidence, gigabytes of data, of records. We've been bringing suitcases of shrapnels and remnants of the shells to the office of the former prosecutor of the International Criminal Court, trying to push them to open the full-scale investigation of the situation of Ukraine. So we've collected evidence of the direct involvement of Russia in that conflict, because there were many allegations that it was just like civil war and Ukrainians fight Ukrainians. So we did a lot to collect evidence that Russia actually shelled territory of Ukraine from its own territory using their regular troops, like army. We've been doing this constantly, and from time to time seeing no proper feedback as to our opinion. We were kind of desperate from time to time, but then when we started to cooperate and collaborate with Ukrainian prosecutors, and when Ukraine not engaged, but appointed prosecutors who were narrowly focused on investigation of the war crimes, we felt our work since 2014 started to bring results, because during the initial months of the invasion back in 2014, there was chaos and there were no police on the places, and many potential war crimes were left undocumented by the officials. But the information was in our hands and in the hands of other NGOs like us, like Truth Hounds. So we started to collaborate with them, bringing from the shelves of our Google Drives the testimonies from 2014, 2015, and like making this contribution to establishing the truth and to bringing the justice to people who were still waiting for the justice to be restored for them, or on behalf of the deceased relatives. So since then, we've been quite fruitfully cooperating with national enforcement and prosecutors, and now our cooperation is on a very high and productive level.
And in that early stage, it sounds like there weren't that many organizations active, and it also sounds like the state hadn't quite sort of geared up to cope with the scale of crimes being committed, as well as the new evidential methods of gathering evidence and so on. Has the situation changed now? Because I read in some of the articles on your website that one of the challenges now is that there are too many organizations, and there's this risk of sort of overlapping and duplicating each other's work.
Well, the situation of the legislation in Ukraine has gradually changed, because we've been pursuing investigators to open cases according to the Ukrainian Criminal Code, the article that prosecutes for committing war crimes, for instance. Instead of that, they would open articles on like committing act of terrorism or illegal possession of arms, which totally doesn't apply to the conflict and to the state, or in the state of conflict. And gradually, things, I think, that was a result as well of our work. They started to qualify the facts of war crimes as war crimes according to Ukrainian Criminal Code, but still, so a lot of implementations to be done inside the Ukrainian legislation, including the adopting of the Rome Statute, for instance, and also implementing the types of crimes into the Ukrainian Criminal Code. But yeah, we are on this track, and we keep going on this path. And answering your question about the number of NGOs and efforts that has been, so initially back in 2014, there have been also some kind of coalition and also other NGOs trying to conduct field monitoring missions, and gradually that kind of activity decreased. And during maybe 3 to 4 years before the full-scale invasion, Truth Hounds was the only Ukrainian team who were constantly on a repetitive basis travel to the conflict-affected areas, collecting and helping Ukrainian law enforcement to do their job. Basically, we're conducting trainings, gatherings with the prosecutors, we're like looking at the materials, prompting them, writing down some papers for them, and overall, like sharing our expertise in the understanding of the nature of international crimes and of what should be done in terms of documentation to investigate and proper prosecute them. Now, after the full-scale invasion, yeah, you are totally right that there are a bunch of organizations started to be engaged into the documentation, including the field work. Not so many, I would say, as for now, maybe I don't know, up to 10 NGOs are now conducting regular field missions, and we also engaged into this process, trying to coordinate them and us, not to overlap, but to help to strengthen this component. So we are party of both coalitions. One is Ukraine 5am coalition of NGOs, and the other one is Tribunal for Putin coalition, with the same aim: accountability for committing international crimes. Truth Hounds, as an NGO that has been doing this constantly, continuously for more than 8 years, like fully involved in, we coordinating the efforts, and also we have shared the database we had to analyze all the evidence and to store them. We have implemented this database several years ago, and since then we have been working in the database, improving it constantly. So the Ukraine 5am coalition adopted our version of the database to evidence analysis, and we also promote this database among law enforcement. And we see high response and interest on having this type of analytical tool, given the fact that there are tens and tens, thousands of crimes, and to have just to see the whole picture. Like a brain of one man can't like include all of them. They would really need some instrument that would help build linkage and like paint broader picture and describe the context and moving the troops and controlling different parts of and different settlements during certain periods of time, as it's crucial to establish link between the incident where people died, where the property were destroyed, to the actual individual who either launched the attack or ordered to do so.
I mean, there are lots of questions that sort of come out of that, but I think, what our audience will be interested in hearing, we'll come on to the judicial reforms in a minute, because I think that's a really interesting area. But when we talk about investigating, do you rely on the territories being liberated by the Ukrainian army, or are you able to gather evidence from territories that are still under occupation?
The territories that are controlled by Russian army are not accessible by our field teams, and we, as an organization, we very much rely on the results of the work of our documenters, because being present on the place and speaking to the eyewitnesses and asking them a particular set of questions, that is the most efficient way to establish the truth, what really has happened. Of course, we have this information from the territories that are now under Russian control, from the people who were able to flee, including people who now end up in different countries, not in Ukraine, in the EU, for instance. Of course, we interview them and able to identify the incidents, to identify the victims, to speak to witnesses, and to try to connect these stories to the perpetrators, using, of course, the open source intelligence and all that data available into the internet. So we've got, like, we have this one direction called monitoring. So from the very first day of the full-scale invasion, we set up a team of monitors. We split the whole Ukraine into regions, and we appointed monitors to look through all the internet, all the Telegram channels, all the news, and save the information, the claims of what happened. So we would later be able to have it, not as a basis, but as a supplement to our field work. And now when the territory are being deoccupied, we send our field teams there, and we pull out the information about what have happened in a chronology, and trying to establish the whole picture. Because you know that not every victim among civilians, not every destruction during the conflict can be, let's say, illegal. There are some legal attacks, and even when civilian objects or civilian persons, like protected objects and protected persons, are being targeted, it's not necessarily constitute the war crime. So we need to know the whole picture at the moment of the attack, the status of the object, the status of the individual that has been targeted. We need to prove the intent to launch the attack against civilians or against protected objects, against the facility that, like, after attack would badly influence the civil population. And this can be done, like, almost only during the being present on the spot and talking to the direct eyewitnesses, and using the methodology to drag out of the memory the whole, not the opinions, but the facts, like what have actually happened.
So does that mean that many of the crimes that you can investigate under the definition of war crimes, is this more likely to be crimes that can be related back to potentially not individual soldiers necessarily, but to their particular battalions and particular regions they come from? So is it much more difficult, or perhaps out of your scope, let's say a missile strike, compared to the actions of a particular battalion on the ground? You give a sense of the different natures of what you're investigating.
It's always individual. Of course, we try to identify the weapon that we used to attack. Without this, we wouldn't be able to connect, to link a particular unit and their commander and the operator of that weapon to the incident. So it takes a lot of time sometimes, but it's important, big part of our work to identify the weapon. And we've got the full list of weapons being used by both parties during the conflict, and also, like, being present on the place. We are able to observe the impact craters and measure them, make videos and photos, and tell by seeing, observing the shape of the crater, where the direction where the shell come from, the approximate distance, and then it's just a matter of time, the satellite imagery and open source, to identify the unit, and then to look for the commander, and then look like what type of weapons are enlisted in what type of weaponry are in a possession of that particular unit, and who operates what. That is why we just, for instance, while talking to witnesses, we can't just take down, like, I saw a tank. We need to ask we need to know for sure if it was a tank, or it was an infantry armored vehicle, or it was a like PCR, because many people can't tell between tank and armored infantry vehicle, and also between armored infantry vehicle and armored paratroop vehicle, which are pretty much the same. They are like they're not having wheels. They having this. Anyway, so this is also, like, crucial to know for sure what type of weapon was used. And of course, we know that Ukrainian law enforcement, while doing their investigation, they collect the remnants of the shells, and they do the expertise. But they're not necessarily able to identify it. And most important, the people working as investigators, police investigators, security service investigators, they in the regions that were not affected by the conflict before February 24, they are not able to properly document the fact of the crime. The approach is like straightforward according to the regular criminal offense. Like I see a dead body, I see a crater, I see a remnants of the shell, so I open the criminal proceeding of the case of a crime, and I will send the remnants of the shell to the expertise. I will interview a couple of witnesses, and that's all. My investigation is ready to be sent to the court. While there are a set of necessary things that are to be documented during the initial documentation, like is there were any presence of the military, what kind of presence, if the attacker was able to miss its legal target, like combatants, and hit the civilians, and many stuff like this. So without having this, you can't build strong case of war crime.
So you're innovating the techniques for gathering data, storing all this electronic data, witness statements, and so on. Are you also heavily involved in improving the judicial processes on how crimes are prosecuted, dealt with, the efficiencies of the court system? I read that you're doing a lot of work to help train prosecutors as well.
Yeah, we've been doing this for 3.5 years. So we started with the police investigators working in the eastern part of Ukraine, in Donetsk and Luhansk region, that are first who are present on the alleged crime scene, who are doing the first initial documentation, who's writing down the reports. So we were training them, and in parallel, we were in a cooperation with the prosecutors, trying to engage them into the proper qualification, into the extensive use of the Article 438 of the Ukrainian Criminal Code, which criminalize war crimes. And then gradually, the war crime department was established within the Office of the Prosecutor General of Ukraine. And we, of course, immediately started to cooperate with them and with their colleagues in different regions. For instance, tomorrow before noon, we will have meeting with the war crime prosecutor here in Chernihiv. So we will share our findings during these 2 days of the documentation, because I'm currently staying in Chernihiv in a field visit. We were traveling across the villages that have been deoccupied 8 months ago, but there are a number of things to be established and most important, to build linkage between the people that were tortured to death and executed and the individuals responsible for that, and especially the commanders who also bears responsibility for themselves and also for the actions of their soldiers. So we're trying to investigate some higher commanders of the Russian army that were occupying Chernihiv region, and also who were planning and conducting assault on Chernihiv with usage of a weapon of indiscriminate nature that led to numerous civilian casualties inside the city of Chernihiv.
And that was going to be my next question, was whether your target is the individual soldiers, or whether you're able to build a case to go higher up, to put together an idea of the orders that were given and hold, more senior officers to account. Is that more challenging to when you get sort of higher up the military chain?
Yeah, of course, it's also always a challenge to prove the higher commander actually gave an order, direct order, for the troops to kill someone or to conduct that kind of attack that killed many civilians, because the order must be written down, and no one would ever be able to collect the paper with the signature of someone who saying I'm the commander of the battalion, I'm ordering you to hit this and this coordinates on this and this place. However, the international humanitarian law includes also the responsibility of commanders of the units and higher commanders for the actions of their troops. And they are obliged to react on the misbehavior of the troops, of the violating of the rules of war. When they don't do that, when they put medals on their chests instead of punishing them, instead of applying penalties of the soldiers who conducted war crimes, they also became war criminals. And investigating them is easier than the last soldier that pulled the trigger literally. But the problem is to establish this linkage, and it's like we're trying really hard to prove the presence and that the commander was aware of the actions of their troops, so we can accuse them of conducting war crimes without for not reacting, for not punishing the servicemen, but also for on the contrary, praising them.
I was going to say, because we know that on the Russian side, brutal behavior, war crimes, rather than just being ignored, they will often actually get rewarded, and rewarded in a very public way. And you know, over the last few years, we've seen that in the assassins who tried to kill Skripal and managed to kill, some UK citizens. Those who killed Litvinenko, they go on to get awarded medals. They go on to get seats in the Russian parliament. And what you see here is that sort of behavior happening on a massive scale, including, of course, the Chechen commanders who may be militarily incompetent, but they're extremely brutal at the same time.
That is absolutely correct, John. I would even say that we have analyzed the field statute of the Russian army, and this kind of behavior that includes violations of all the rules of war are being indoctrinated into the field statute of the soldiers, and it's been stated that shame on that commander who not using all means and methods to achieve its military goal, despite any who's doubting of anything. So he just need to be straightforward and imply any means in any method to achieve its military goal, despite the whatever happened. So it's been the method of warfare of Russia, which we have been seeing for many years in different conflicts, and we've seen this during this invasion when the Russian troops just flattering the whole settlements. They destroying every single settlement without letting brick on a brick in a whole cities, in a whole town, and that's they absolutely don't care, because it's how they fight the wars throughout the world. It's a normal behavior for them.
And that's so documenting crimes is one thing, and of course, people who've been able to flee, let's say, from cities like Dnipro and Mariupol, some people, of course, are able to come over and bring their stories with them. And even in the village where I live, in near Oxford, we have families here from those cities, and we've been able to hear their stories at first hand, which are, it's more shocking when you meet an individual and you're able to speak to them and understand them and hear the details of their personal story. But many other civilians, of course, were forced to flee or were even abducted the other way and were forced to go through Russian territory. Does any of your work involve trying to sort of track down the deported, filtrated people that may not have made it through those territories or may have ended up in Russia? Or are there other organizations who are trying to track them down, especially children, which is one of the most traumatic parts of that story?
Yeah, right. This track is among our directions of work. and we mostly rely on our partners in different countries, including Georgia, because many people who were able to, who were transferred to Russia, then they were able to flee to Georgia and ended up there. So, like, our partners, they meet and interviewing people, doing screening interviews of these stories, and also partners working in the EU countries and in other countries. They also trying to meet them, but also we in a close contact with the police investigators focusing on the investigating of international crimes in the countries of EU, for instance, because it's been a procedure that every new Ukrainian who arrives to the country need to go through, including the invitation to talk to about their experience to the local police officers. We in touch with them, and of course we also identifying the victims who end up on the soil of different countries and share our findings from the spot. So we travel to the actual spot, we interview the eyewitnesses other than the victim or the witness ending up in other countries, and then share these materials with the prosecutors in that country and the investigators, trying to force them to open investigation on that particular case that have happened on the territory of Ukraine on behalf of the victim being present on the soil of that country.
So that, of course, generates a vast amount of work for the judicial systems in those countries. And of course, Ukraine must have a vast amount that will go on for years and years and cost an absolute fortune, but it's essential work. Now, are you funded by the state, or do you rely upon donors and support from the public?
Well, we're not state. We're non-governmental organization, so we're not funded by Ukraine. We rely on the charity of the different donors. We've got throughout our history, we've got different donors, embassies, and the partner NGOs, and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of different countries. And of course, it's always a challenge for the NGO working on the grant system to maintain the operations, because once one grant is over, we need to have another grant, and it's always it's always some grants are overlapping, some gaps maybe between the grants. So now we're really looking for some co-funding, not the project funding, but the program funding. And the program is the documenting, investigating, training prosecutors and investigators, and also speaking with judges who will eventually receive the materials, and also coordinating efforts of other NGOs inside Ukraine, and coordinating efforts of NGOs outside Ukraine, and making informational campaigns, engaging journalists from media. So it's the whole big frontier of work. The whole frontier we're pushing is our program, and our program goal is to be individual criminal responsibility for every perpetrator of the international crimes committed here, and preventing of the war crimes from being committed in future. So it's a really ideal long-standing goal, our program goal, and all our program activities are aimed at achieving this goal.
And I was reading on your website a very interesting article about you pay incredible attention, don't you, not just to the stories of the victims, but trying to avoid re-traumatizing them by, doing investigations in a way that might place, emotional pressure on them, trying to avoid too many interviews of the same witness, and avoiding multiple organizations taking the same kind of statements to avoid that duplication, which can put, huge emotional trauma on the victims. So I'd love to hear a bit more about that methodology and how it evolved and how you conduct this research with that sort of sensitivity to the victims.
Yeah, well, Jonathan, it's not only about the re-traumatization of the victims, which is very important, of course, but also about the potential endangering the court hearings when the person has been interviewed multiple times by different entities, and then one more time by the official organs. The statements, testimony can be dismissed in the court, and that is something we need to be vigilant about. And our aim not to put our fingerprints in the brains of the people we talk to. So after the identification of the person, we try not to lead them in any way, and we use the methodology of the documentation, which is quite common for all the people doing the investigations throughout the world. We've been talking to the Norwegian police department doing the investigation of crimes, and we shared our methodology with them. So it's called Kripos. I got a pen from them. So they provided, and they said, like, yeah, we had the same methodology of interviewing witnesses of the potential war crimes. Overlapping, we try to evade this by sharing the information with other NGOs, by sharing our plans to conduct field missions to that and that settlements, and also the narrative reports from the field missions, so anyone can see and not travel to the same area and not to enter the same house and not to ask questions to the same person. Of course, we obtain the consent from the persons to share this information with our partners, which and our partnership are being protected by the NDA, and we're not letting it out. Of course, we're asking them about the consent for the statement to be shared with the law enforcement inside Ukraine or outside Ukraine, or to share them with the media or with the archive institutions, because we've been approached by a couple of archives asking us if we can share all the evidence we've been collected for 8 years with them to store and systematize and keep in the archives. So once this consent is obtained, we share, and we will have inside the 5AM coalition the common shared database where every testimony will be visible to other partners. And it's very productive in a way of resource-wise, because the resources are really limited, the human resources, the time resources, not to travel the same roads, not to enter the same house. It's always one can open the results, or one can open the case, one can look through the evidence and plan their mission to further investigate, to further document, because there are so many cases when you interview one person and the person tells you about 1, 2, and 3 incidents in details, and you don't have time, and person is have information about the 4 and 5 incident, and the documenter don't have time just to fully interview person. And in many cases, person just have this piece of information. But in the neighboring settlement, I have heard that Russian soldiers, they killed a man who were trying to evacuate his family in his car, and that's all. And I just know that his name was Victor, and that's all. And this information is available to the partners, so they, while planning their trips, they will include trip to that settlement, and they will know already briefly, in general terms, what have happened, and they would be able to ask people. So we have heard that someday, we don't know when, but a guy named Victor has been killed when he was trying to evacuate his family, and they will document that instead of doing the documentation of the cases that's been done by some other NGO. So it's the whole idea of the coordination and having the common shared database, and we put in really a lot of efforts, and we've appointed a person inside of our organization to do this networking with other actors to avoid traumatization and to do more having the same amount of resources. And yeah, I may add one more thing, that proper documentation, proper interviewing of the people who suffered this kind of trauma can be also therapeutic to them, because in many cases they just can't tell their story to anyone, because many people around them, they suffered the same things, and they like, whom I'm gonna to tell my story, because everyone else were on the same circumstances, in the same situation. When someone else comes and ask questions and in details, asking them to share all the bits of the data, of the bits of the memories, and then we normally read back the statement to the witness, just to be sure we understood everything right and put it in a right chronology. Then the person started to overcome this trauma while, like, after being told, after telling the whole story of their the most intense and the worst moments of their lives, and then hearing back from the documenter. So it's also this kind of effective.
And of course, they lived under a condition of extreme lawlessness. I mean, we know Russia is not a country that has due process, that has a judicial system that is fair, and then there's nothing really there of civil society remaining. It's all been dismantled over years and years, and these victims you're talking about have been subject to that sort of Russian chaos, that Russian lawlessness. Then to speak to people like you and see an organization which is reintroducing, some semblance of civil society, some sort of due process. Does that help them to understand that normality to an extent is returning?
Oh, I never thought about that. Maybe for many people that lived under Russian occupation, like in Izum, we've been to Izum, which was occupied by Russian troops for more than half a year, more than 6 months. And during that 6 months, people living there, they had no gas, no water supply, no electricity, no heating, no food supply almost, because Russian troops were prohibited even to trade their own goods from these dungeons and cellars, like grocery and this kind of stuff. So they've been so desperate, and they nearly lost hope to get back to normal life, like they have been living before the occupation. And then I think so. Then, like, they see how it's being done, and for many people, this justice is the last thing in their lives to rely on. They lost everything; they have nothing to rely on. But this fact, like, all right, I do not want that you guys will find out who did that. And I think so. I know that in DRC there were like field trials in the settlements that were affected by some armed groups. They brought these suspects to the settlement and brought judges and lawyers, advocates and prosecutors. They held the trial inside the settlement. I'm not saying we can do this in Ukraine, because most of the perpetrators are outside of Ukraine or on the occupied territories or inside Russia. But at least informing people in the affected settlements that, like, your perpetrator has been identified and is being prosecuted, at least in absentia, and they've been charged for this and this amount of years in prison, would really, like, bring them back to normal life, and would allow them to, like, get back to normal.
Yeah. So how many cases has your organization researched so far? And excuse me. And how many prosecutions who've been able to launch? Or, as you say, are many of those going to be sort of in absentia?
So we have documented, I don't know how many thousands of the cases, and created I don't know how many tens of thousands of documents, different, like it's not only witness testimonies, it's also the video files of the documenters doing, like, filming the alleged crime scene, the craters, the shrapnel traces, the destructions, and also obtaining photos and videos from the witnesses. They have taken the immediate aftermath of the attack, different, like, patches, fragments, everything. So we've got several thousands of documents. We have put together more than 40 investigations so far. So on the cases, so we've taken the case and we have, like, documented everything we could. We have had everything from the internet we could find. We, like, set our team of analysts to do open source and to build the whole structure from the incident, the whole linkage to the perpetrator and the alleged and the commander. So it's been 40 of them. All of them have sent to Ukrainian prosecutors, and they either open the new cases on that crimes, or requalify the existing ones to war crimes cases, or if they had already investigation of the war crime, and under the war crime article, they would add our materials to the proceedings. So most of the cases, or maybe all of them, are on a stage, on investigative stage now. The Ukrainian,
and of course,
then
and of course that's going to grow. I mean, as more territory is liberated, as Russia, which, you know, we believe is possible, is going to be pushed out of every territory of Ukraine sometime next year, there are going to be substantially, you know, more crimes investigated, and some of those may go back a long period because, you know, Donbass, despite the Russian propaganda, is also occupied, and there have been disappearances, torture, and a lot of sort of coercion within the occupied territory of Donbass and Crimea, dating back 8 or 9 years now.
Yeah, sure, absolutely right. And realizing that fact, that there are already thousands, like altogether, more than 80,000 of cases open, like conflict-related cases open now by Ukrainian officials, and also that there will be more. We realizing that we are a small team of 30 people now, maybe a little bit more with the like rare documenters. But Ukraine is a huge state. It has 19,000 investigators altogether. I'm not saying all of them wouldn't investigate international crimes, but we need to give them these tools and knowledge. So we put in a lot of efforts in training, meeting with them, mentoring on some specific cases, writing down the model indictments of different types of war crimes, and also engaging them into using and introducing the analytical database for them to be able to use this tool and to expand. Because of course, Truth Hounds cannot do much in that regards. And as our final aim is the justice for all the victims of war crimes, we engage in like broader audiences in Ukraine, and also we're trying to engage as many foreign officials investigating international crimes into this process, pushing them to and planting the idea of open the investigations, sharing the evidence, talking to them, visiting them, writing down the dossiers on the perpetrators, sending the dossiers. We've been involved into the work of the Genocide Network, the EU network of the war crime prosecutors and investigators that also include the Europol and Interpol and the ICC as well, and several international NGOs. So it's many ways we exploiting now to achieve this long-standing goal.
And my last two questions are related to sort of the broader picture as well, because it's not just the crimes of individuals in Ukraine, is it? You're also investigating crimes against the environment, which of course has been sort of despoiled in many areas where Russia is conducting its operations. And you don't just operate in Ukraine, do you? You have teams and relationships with other NGOs in other theatres of conflict in the world?
Yeah, Jonathan, environment and crimes against it are really hard to prove, actually, because we need to prove the intent to harm the environment and to use the ways of warfare that will harm environment much greatly than the attacking party would gain the potential military benefit from launching this attack. Right, environment has been suffering from the warfare for many years already, and we have identified some deliberate attacks on the environment and the nature reservoirs as well.
Unfortunately, in this point of the interview, the electricity seems to have cut out. We tried to regain communication with Roman to thank him for his insights into the terrible crimes that his organization, Truth Hounds, is investigating. And I wanted to thank him for the amount of time and thought he'd put into this interview. And of course, wish him luck in his future endeavors and work. That's okay.
I hope we will be able, and I will answer your last questions.
We should probably do, yeah. We'll do the last question and then we'll sort of wrap the video up, because it sounds like technically it's becoming quite difficult. So, yeah, the last question was about the collaboration with international organizations in other conflicts around the world and helping them with their, how to sort of learn to improve their investigations and judicial processes.
Of course, we're happy to share our expertise as gradually we became an experts in documenting, first of all, and mostly we started to share our experience with other groups in other conflict-affected areas. For instance, when back in 2020, the hostilities outburst in Nagorno-Karabakh, we traveled there. We actually did the documentation, so we spent 3 weeks on both sides of the conflicts, on Armenian and on Azerbaijani side. And also we trained groups in Yerevan and in Baku on how to properly document, interview people, and other stuff. We've been to Georgia several times, close to the occupied Abkhazia and to South Ossetia. We have been to Belarus when the protests were brutally dispersed. We've been to Tajikistan when it was border conflict with Kyrgyzstan last year. So we traveled there to train the group of NGO representatives how to properly document international crimes. We conducted such trainings in Kazakhstan. Recently, just a week ago, we did the same for NGO representatives in Moldova. So we've been to Yerevan in 2015 and 17 when the huge protests were brutally dispersed by the riot police. So documentation is our work, and we've been doing this for more than 8 years already constantly. And gradually, after gained our expertise and becoming an expert, we started to share this knowledge, expertise, and little tips with all the groups that are interested and that are doing this kind of documentation. I've been to Lebanon actually, and there were people from Syria, the civil society representatives, and I was conducting this training of documentation. And after the training, some people came to me and said, "Where have you been several years ago? Because if we will have this kind of training several years back, we would be able to document much more." So we're trying not to let in these blank spots to be present. Of course, we're now fully, but also we try to support other NGOs inside Ukraine who's doing the same to unify the methodology and to collect the proper documentation on the ground, to use the proper methodology, not to jeopardize the official proceedings, not to spoil the evidence, not to traumatize and re-traumatize the people who suffered a lot during this conflict, and also to investigate, establish linkage, and identify the exact individuals responsible for the international crimes.
Well, Roman, it's incredible work that you're doing. It's very necessary work. It's traumatic, I imagine, for the investigators as well. But I know your time is hugely precious, and I wanted to thank you for spending so much time explaining to us the process of how justice is coming to Ukraine and Ukrainians, and how you're helping other organizations to deliver it, as well as the work you're doing on the ground. I also thank you for persevering with the internet problems, because I know we dropped out a number of times, and I want to remind our audience that Roman is calling in from Ukraine, which is subject to missile strikes and attacks on the infrastructure. So I really appreciate you spending so much time in talking and sort of persevering with the outages we experienced. Roman, thank you so much, and Slava Ukraini.
Jonathan, thank you.